We're going to hand over now to another element of the sport which again is very prevalent in the modern era as it continues to evolve, and that is fitness. It's very important obviously for not just the drivers but also team personnel, mechanics, engineers within various different disciplines of the sport to keep on top of the physical side, and one man who knows all about that is Porsche's Human Performance Development Manager, Eliot Challifour. Welcome, Eliot. It's good to get inside in the warm for a change, because I know that most of the work you do obviously is based on the other side of the circuit. So tell us a little bit about what Porsche gets up to on the Silverstone side of things.
Yes, I run a Human Performance Centre, which is within the Porsche Experience Centre, which is just off Hangar Straight. So the big circular silver building you'll see as you drive past. So in there we have a lab and a training room. So it's set up to basically put numbers to fitness. So if you want to know more about yourself, more about your own physiology, then we can tell you a lot about yourself. And then it's using those numbers to then influence the training you're going to do thereafter. So everything's devised around the individual. So your starting point is obviously based on yourself. And then it's based on your sport and your goals and your targets. So if it's motorsport, it's obviously the category you're looking to race. And we have a lot of young drivers progressing through the motorsport ladder. That will go all the way up to F1, and I also train Stoffel Vandoorne for McLaren, so I'm his trainer as well. So yeah, we've had all of them come to us throughout the years. We've had Daniel Ricciardo for heat acclimation and sweat testing, and various other drivers like Robert Wickens and all the Racing Steps Foundation drivers. So quite a number over the years. And yeah, and it's open to anyone. So anyone like yourselves can come along, not just in motorsport, could be a runner, a cyclist, a triathlete. Yeah, we even have boxers, so all different sorts of people. So it's quite a mixture.
It's be quite interesting when obviously the brand has a history in automotive sectors and in motorsport, but you're having to push the boundaries to a certain extent of where you're actually working within. I mean, the sectors that you work in, as you say, I mean, it goes beyond racing cars and it goes beyond motorsport. So you're actually having to push a little bit further than your own comfort zones at times.
Yeah, it's just about human performance, really. It's yeah, it's about the individual trying to get the best out of yourself. In terms of motorsport, it's just making sure that you're physically comfortable with the stresses of the category that you're in. Or for a lot of the young drivers, it's not only that, it's making sure they're ready for the next step that they're wanting to move into, so they're always preparing for the category above. That was something that was always important for Racing Steps, because they were always going to go from karting to, well, F4 it is these days, to some of the Renault Formulas, or Renault 3.5 was, or 2-litre 3.5, and then maybe F2 or GP2. So they were always preparing along that ladder and that line. And there's different stresses for different cars. Obviously, in Porsche racing cars, they're a lot less physical than a single-seater car, but there's obviously closed cockpits, very high heat, and often quite long endurance races. So they've got to cope with different stresses, really.
So what is the toughest challenge when working with a driver from scratch? I mean, what is the first element, really, when you meet a racer for the first time that are going into the program, with no prior experience of really getting to that sort of level of fitness? What are the first major difficulties?
I mean, the testing basically highlights where they're strong and where they're weak, so we know where to work on them as an individual. I mean, if they're a very good athlete, it's great. You've got someone that's got a lot of discipline and dedication already, because they've put a lot of hard work in before they even get to you, and then it's just a case of refining that and developing them on. If you have someone that's not starting from a great place within their fitness, as long as they've got the attitude and the willingness to put the hard work in to make the progress that they need to make, then that's great. I mean, everyone starts at their own level. As long as they've got the willingness to put the effort in after that initial test and get them to where they need to be.
Now, one of the most fascinating factors to me about how motorsport has evolved in regards to fitness is when Michael Schumacher came along in Formula One, there was a bit of a culture of keeping after yourself, looking after yourself in Formula One, but the level to which Schumacher really pushed that in sort of the early 90s to mid-90s, where he was basically taking his fitness to almost the same competitive level as his driving, that has now become the norm within Formula One as a sport. But with Porsche, I gather, it's pretty much been that way for even a little while longer than Michael Schumacher started it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general the professionalism of fitness in motorsport has been sort of developing since the late 1990s, and now it's a fairly mainstream thing. I mean, we do a lot of work with the Motorsport Association and their various development pathways, and we just recently did a training camp with them down in Devon, actually, which was really good fun, where you've got rally drivers, single-seater drivers, co-drivers, motorcyclists. You've got a whole, mixture of different elements of the sport all come together.
It must make for some really interesting days out.
It's good fun. It's good fun, and because they're not always in the same category, there's a sort of an element of competitiveness, and they like, a rally driver likes to see how fit they are compared to a single-seater driver and those sorts of things. But the professionalism of the sport's really come on. I'd say it's probably still catching up with where Olympic sports are. Like your rowing, your cycling, your running, your athletics. We're still on a little bit of a catch up there. But certainly at the very top end, there's specialists in everything. So if you go to Formula One, there'll be your doctor, there'll be myself, who would be the kind of the trainer and the person overseeing the program for the individual, making sure they've got access to their nutritionists. Some of them will have a psychologist. They'll be going for fitness testing with a sports scientist. So there's quite a broad team of people that help that individual to go in the right direction. So that's the model that we created in a kind of a smaller way. So we have a doctor that does stress ECGs and medicals, which probably most people need here to get the race license, and he can do more in-depth testing as well. Then we'll have a sports scientist, someone who will do sports rehab if someone gets injured, and then there'll be people like myself doing the strength and conditioning, getting you fit and ready to race, really.
So I guess one of the biggest challenges, certainly within Porsche's Human Performance, is Le Mans, because obviously it's the biggest weekend of the year for a marque such as Porsche. There's so much history in terms of the wins, not only overall, but also in the individual classes. Yeah. There's such a major success. What is that Le Mans week like? No, I mean, obviously, we've seen it from a media perspective. We watch the drivers go through a week, and obviously the press engagements, we see them, the interview. But from the fitness side, that week has got to be such an intensive week physically for a driver.
Yeah, I think whether it's something like Le Mans or it's Formula One, I guess the bit you don't realise is that the driver will do, their free practice sessions, etc. But it's not just the physical demands of coping with that hour and a half or 2 hours in the car, whatever it might be. But then they'll jump out the car, and then they've literally got 2-3 minutes to change, turn around, and then they're either in engineering debriefing, then straight in front of cameras. So it's non-stop. So it's not just being fitness for that period of time in the car. That you need to be getting out fresh, totally alert, and able to do a 12-hour day and be sharp, and then do it all again another 2 days in a row.
Because I've covered 24-hour endurance races in various different disciplines of motorsport, but I think a lot of drivers just aren't prepared for not just, you know, the duration that they're going to be in the car for and what that does in terms of your consciousness. You know, you're obviously mentally drained, you're obviously very exhausted, but you have to be able to be on top of yourself in terms of your own peak physical condition.
Yeah, I mean, in the 24-hour races, they're obviously long periods of time in the car. You've got sleep deprivation as well, and then you're having to think about their nutrition to recover before they're going back out again. So there's a lot going on, and obviously the night racing requires a lot of concentration. So yeah, they're busy times. I mean, there's a big emphasis in there on cardiovascular fitness and body composition. So looking at, that's always a big one that comes down on me, especially in something like Formula One, is that there'll be a driver plus their kit weight, and the engineers will basically give me a very precise weight that the driver needs to be, and if he's over that weight, then that will basically penalise their quali lap time by, you know, X number of hundredths, depending on how much over that weight they are. So that then falls down into kind of my profession to make sure that they're fit, healthy, lean, strong, on the weight they need to be, and then the team can get the performance out of the car, really.
Well, I was at Le Mans at 2016, and one of the things that really characterised the entirety of that race, as you'll well remember being there, is that there was so much within that race that was changing throughout the course. There was never one moment of dominance for any one particular team at any one particular time, whether that be in the prototype class or the GT. And with those sort of races, you've got to balance all of these different elements. You've got to balance the strategy, making sure that the fuel is on pace, the tyres are well looked after, the driver changeover as well, you know, the fitness levels are high, the nighttime. There's just so many different elements. I mean, managing all of those different factors over the course of one race, I mean, it must take an amazing amount of organisation.
Yeah, I mean, the teams are vast. If you look at the schedules and the itineraries, you know, there's 80 people flying around the world continuously to basically get one or two pilots out there and doing their sport. So it's, you know, the group effort to get that result is massive.
Does it get any easier?
No, I mean, it only takes one thing. It only takes a part to fail, or, you know, not to conserve your fuel, your tyres enough for something to go wrong. So, yeah, you basically everyone needs to make sure that their part is done to the best of its ability, and then it comes together as a collective team, really.
That must be a particular aspect of it that's quite difficult to adapt to when things are going wrong, when you've obviously got a set routine for, you know, a set procedure for how things should go over the course of a race. When something does go wrong, not just with the drivers, but with the mechanics as well.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that human performance and how you deal with that situation and how you are prepared for that situation, that really becomes a massive factor.
Yeah, I guess that becomes a little bit more psychological in that you just need to reset. You'll often see that, for example, on a pit stop. You know, if they make a mistake or it's not an ideal pit stop in the time they want to make, then the team manager on the wall will be basically asking the guys just to reset, get themselves back together, get collected before they do their next pit stop. So you know, if things happen, you just need to put them behind you and refocus on what's going on next to try and make up for it, I guess.
So you talked about a few of the personalities that have come through Porsche Human Performance in the various different realms of motorsport. Who is it that's particularly stood out as an impressive individual that's come through? Who have you really taken a shine to that's come through?
I mean,
there's so many to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of individuals over the years. I mean, probably who I work with now, Stoffel Vandoorne's probably one of the most disciplined, dedicated individuals, you know, I've had the pleasure of working with. You know, he's been really excellent, and it looks like he's got a good career with Mercedes for next year moving forward. Yeah. So that would be good for him. Other drivers coming through. I've had some crazy Aussies that are very. I quite like the Southern Hemisphere
Yeah.
Kind of people like Webber we know well, and had people like Brendan Hartley, and kind of a more local kind of driver who's an Aussie as well. I quite like those guys. They have the kind of the right, I guess, discipline and attitude and work ethic that kind of suits, I guess, physical fitness well. But yeah.
So we've talked about many, many times over the years in different shows, in different places, what makes a good racing driver. People have got an idea what makes a good racing driver. From your perspective, when you're looking at the human performance element, what makes a good athlete to work with in terms of their attitude, in terms of their discipline? What do you really look for in someone who's going to get the most out of what you do?
Someone that's able to learn quickly. So again, this is one with Stoffel probably the most out of anyone, is that, you know, if you have someone where you teach them something technically in what to do, they're able to master that technique very quickly, and you know, all of a sudden then, you know, as a coach, you're challenged because they're learning what you're teaching them exceptionally quickly, and then you're needing to keep progressing it and developing it. I like the kind of the drivers or athletes in any sport to have a certain level of independence, so they're able to not be solely reliant on us being there. So if we have drivers that are, we've had a few of these over the years as well, that are inherently maybe a little bit lazy, then they basically require us to be there the whole time to ensure that they're doing what they should be doing. Whereas ideally, you know, you want a driver or an athlete where you're kind of coaching them and guiding them, but then when you're giving them the tools and resources that when they're not with you, they're also training hard, you can monitor it remotely, and then you're seeing them on whatever frequency it is, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, to update and progress what they're doing, because then you know they've got that self-discipline to be able to put the work in on their own, as well as take the guidance from you. I think as a coach, that's what you want. You want to sort of have them a lot to begin with to teach them, and then let the reins go as they get older and get more developed and have more knowledge themselves.
So obviously, as drivers come up from the world of, say, karting, or they're getting started into motor racing, as they kind of make their way through, it must be a real challenge to work with these guys who are basically looking at this element of motorsport for the first time. They're really starting to learn that, you know, their body is a temple. They've got to look after it if they want to move up in motor racing. So there must be some very interesting challenges to working with these youngsters who are just getting into motor racing for the first time and starting to think at that level for the first time. Yeah. I mean, it's they're starting out on that ladder and that process, really. What advice would you give to someone who's starting to look at that level, trying to get themselves to that peak?
Yeah, I think enjoy it is probably the big thing, especially if you're young and you're doing sport. I mean, I guess I'll quite often see with lots of young drivers that parents might even take them out of school to start obviously trying to progress their motorsport career, because it's so time consuming, all the track time, and they're not able to complete school properly. But certainly with the youngsters, I wouldn't necessarily sort of push them to being like an adult athlete. You know, I think it's good that they still go and, you know, do their team sports with people of their own age and have that kind of social context, as well as doing a bit of specific work for their sport. And then obviously as they get older, they'll move into doing a lot more specific training for their sport. But I think some of the youngsters maybe miss out if they're, you know, they should be playing rugby and football and badminton and squash and doing a whole mixture of sports when they're young alongside their karting. I think they're ultimately their development physically is limited if they're specialised too early, too soon, and that's quite a common sort of failing. I guess I would see is that they're pulled out of doing all the other sports just to focus on motorsport and karting. And I think later in life, certainly when we start to pick them up, you realise that, you know, they don't have any movement patterns for doing a squat or a lunge or they can't even throw and catch very well. So you know what I mean, all the basics that you should have when you're developing as a youngster at a school age are kind of missed by the time we pick them up, which means you then need to reteach it all before you develop them on.
Yeah, because I've read a lot of biographies from people within motor racing, and we've seen a lot in the press about the likes of sort of Mark Webber and Jenson Button, who are very heavily into their triathlete competitions.
Endurance sports. Yeah,
there are drivers who will go and do other bits and pieces. I mean, Michael Schumacher was forever kicking a football around the paddock and going and doing charity matches.
Yeah.
Is it important, do you think, for drivers to pursue as many different sports as possible if they see something that seems to suit their style? Is it important for them to explore lots of different types of sport alongside what they're doing?
I think as a child, yes. So as a child, yes, and as you get older, you'll specialise more. I think for people, so I know Mark and I know Jensen a bit as well, I guess for them they had a slightly obsessive focus into endurance sports, which was a bit of an outside passion outside of their motorsport. I think if you go down that route, you need to not lose sight that motorsport is your sport. So you're using whatever cycling, running, strength and conditioning as a gym as a method to be fit for your motorsport. But you don't really want to get sidetracked into becoming, I guess, overly focused on another sport when it can take your focus away for certain individuals. But yeah.
So when you do World Championship campaigns with the World Endurance Championship or in these individual competitions, and the driver that you've been working with has got to the top step of the podium, the achievement of the ambition is there. From your perspective, the amount of drivers that you've worked with, I mean, the emotions that run deep within a team, I mean, your element of it is crucial to making all of those things happen. I mean, the engineers can do all of the hard work to make the car run well, but if the driver is not physically up to the task, then it becomes very apparent. So I guess that, being part of that moment as a member of a team where everybody's pooled their resources together to get that victory, that's a very special element of making the athletes that you're working with, the stars and the household names that they become.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to be part of that team. I guess in my role is, especially in something like Formula One, is that you end up being with your driver from the moment they have breakfast to the moment they have dinner and go to bed. So you end up kind of living and breathing when they're having a great time, and living and breathing when they're having a really bad time as well. So you end up being that moral support as well as kind of doing the technical element of your job. So yeah, you do get caught up in that kind of emotional side of how their career's progressing, I guess.
I suppose from that element, the human performance side of what you're doing, it becomes far more than just the physical. I mean, you're almost an accompanist to what they're doing. You're there living those emotions and feeling them with them.
Yeah, you end up being part of the story and a friend along the journey, really.
Is it tough to, make that sort of transition when you're obviously there to do a job, but you're working with these guys, you're part of their universe, you're part of their daily routine? It must be a very interesting angle to see from some of these drivers that nobody else would ever get to see, perhaps not even the major team personnel.
You definitely spend far more time with the individual driver than anyone else. Probably it's yourself and their head engineer that you're probably the two people they'll spend the most time with, basically.
There must be fascinating stories of people that you've seen them at their best and seen them at their worst. Is there anything you can let us into, or is that one of those areas where confidentiality is massive? What I'm saying is, this is code for can you drop someone in it at this point?
No, I'll probably try not to. But I mean, most of them are they're very disciplined when they need to be disciplined, but equally you need to relax a bit once the job's done, and unwind. So
some great parties.
Sometimes, yeah. Especially if you do well.
Excellent. No best man stories yet.
No, not yet. I'll save those.
I have to say, it's an element of the sport that fascinates me, because I don't think it quite gets the credence it should. But as the sport evolves, as the technology develops, I guess we're going to start to see more of what you guys do in a little bit more detail. You know, as the sport itself evolves and we become more interested in every single element. We're in this culture where we want to digest as much information as we can. I mean, broadcast technology, we were talking a little earlier, that's evolving, and we're starting to get more data, more information, and we want more. I guess this is something that we're going to start to learn more about the human performance side of it that we've never known before.
Yeah, I mean, probably the big bit that's really lacking in the sport is if you look at the cars, there's a huge amount of data on the cars. They've got screens and screens of information on anything you want to see. Yet the one person in the vehicle they've got absolutely no data on is the driver. So they're currently not allowed to connect the driver up to see any of his physiology whilst he's driving. So there is technology I've seen being developed to get approval to be able to do that. So I don't know whether that technology will initially purely be private for analysis, or whether that will actually go out and be visible on TV screens for public to see that kind of physiology of heart rate and G-force on the body and braking loads and steering loads and you know, all of that kind of human physical information, which is currently sort of missing, really.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I was last weekend commentating somewhere else, and I had the app open for the Mexican Grand Prix, and the data that you can get following a particular car around the track is quite astonishing. And I have seen the technology you're talking about, where they are starting to measure heart rate, you know, core temperature, these sorts of things. Do you think that there is a market for that in Formula One, in Le Mans, amongst the fans? They want to ingest that sort of information as well?
I would have thought so. I would have thought any form of closer interaction is going to be, you know, really interesting for the viewers at home. But yeah, I mean, first of all, from our point of view, it's a bit of a must, really, for that to be allowed. Obviously, we get all the data off the engineers, so we know what the loads are every time they're hitting the brakes and turning the wheel and the G-forces on the body. But to have a bit more live data on every single individual race of the driver behind the wheel would be, that's what the sport needs, really.
So I guess that's the next thing that we need to see in Formula One and Le Mans overnight, is that sort of data.
I've seen it a little bit in gloves. They've got gloves with little boxes now, which gives some data on those sorts of things. So there's technology coming, I think. So,
are you excited about those sort of advances?
Yeah.
I mean, from your point of view, I mean, where we're going in sort of that style of technology, there must be so many different things that, as we evolve, we're going to be able to tap into. Is there a particular, aside from that, is there any other element that you think, you know, you'd like to have a play with in terms of technology?
It's probably just mainly that, really. It's just we just need to, you know, just need to know the numbers on the individuals at every race, at every circuit, and build a long-term picture of that.
How does
I mean, you have that in every sport. If you look at cycling, I mean, you know, they'll have individual data on every rider at every race, on every stage, and that's what you need in motorsport too, really.
Well, how does the esports side of it fit in? Because I'm guessing, you know, you can do an awful lot of work in terms of data analysis. I mean, drivers do an awful lot of work in simulators to get the feel of a car, but I'm guessing from a fitness point of view, that can really blend in well with it too.
Yeah, I mean, some of the simulators are quite, they have a certain amount of load on them, so they are sort of reasonably physical for the drivers. I mean, I think the esport thing's interesting in that in motorsport, I guess the barrier to participation is really high because of cost. So, you know, you've got a fairly small population coming into the sport, and then of that, they're going to get whittled down even smaller to make it to the top. Whereas something like esports, you've got a very low cost to enter, so therefore it's massively competitive because you've got, you know, millions of people taking part in it. So I think that's where that one's quite interesting. Is the level on the standard will be super high because the amount of, you know, the people you got at the bottom of the pyramid is really large.
Well, this is a level of the sport that really fascinates me, and I hope a few people have got a better understanding as to what these drivers and engineers are going through in a bit more detail. Eliot, it's fascinating to hear about it in a bit more detail, and I'm sure if anybody's got any further questions,
yeah, I'll be around
for Eliot, you're going to linger around and answer them. And of course, as you said, anybody can pop over to the Porsche Centre over the way and find out what it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eliot Challifour. Thank you very much.